I remember when I started working with the Wuppertal Institute, a research institute in Germany, one of my colleagues then asked me, a lawyer, what are you doing here? I mean, we're a research institute, right? We work on natural sciences, on social sciences. So what do we need a lawyer for? I think maybe the general idea that the organizers might have had is that in addition to what the natural sciences tell us about the state of our planet, we've just heard about it, what the social sciences tell us about potential ways of dealing with these issues, we also need an idea about how to deal with it and what kind of instruments we have available in order to cope with those problems. Just think of the presentations this morning. It's a random kind of just what my memory produced, really. We had the case of minerals extraction, right? At least two of the presentations today. So what's the role of the law in here? For example, we have supply chain legislation now. It's taken decades, really, of research, of convincing policymakers to actually get this kind of legislation done. And it wasn't easy. It's an uphill battle all the time. But now, in the European Union, CSDDD, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and in various member states of the EU and other parts of the world, you've got legislation requiring companies to actually not only disclose the kind of impacts that their supply chains have on human rights, on the pollution, not only to report it, but also to stop it. A very, very important step, because usually companies so far can only say, well, sorry, but I mean, this is another company. We commissioned them and they're working for us, but they told us that they are doing, that work they are doing is fine. No human rights violation, no child labor, and it's really clean. Now they can't excuse anymore. And people, citizens, organizations can go to court and sue these companies. First, to make them stop doing it, and second, they may sue actually the people in those countries, in Indonesia, in the Philippines. They may sue the company in Germany. Great, great achievement. Or we had coping with climate changes in coastal areas. So that runs more in the kind of international sphere. Huge problems that are going to arise with sea level rise, with ocean acidification, with overfishing and all that. And in the climate change negotiations, you've got, first of all, provisions that supply, or are supposed to supply, you all know about COP29 and the kind of turmoil that it produces, but provide financial resources for those countries to actually deal with them. And quite new, since last year actually, a fund for loss and damage has been set up, where countries can actually get money because of the previous losses that they had and receive compensation for it. Just a very quick look at, and I think, I mean, if you would come and we would look at what you're doing, I could tell you, yeah, I mean, what kind of legal instruments there are available in order to cope with this problem and to deal with it. So if we look at what the law is, and that's why I was asking who is actually working with it, not many people have an idea of what the law really is. Does anybody here?
A social contract.
A social contract.
Social construct.
Construct. Yep.
Simply institutions, if it's not respected, like institution can act to force. To be forced.
Okay, yes.
Treaties, legal agreements.
Okay. Well, it's a set of rules, right? It's a set of rules. The kind of distinguishing feature from other rules is that it's enforceable. So there are institutions behind it. But it's a set of rules devised by a community of people in a town, in a region, in the nation, at the European level, at the international level, a set of rules that's designed to regulate the behavior of people, of organizations, of companies, of states. It's not more than that. It's really simple, but it's that. It's meant to regulate behavior. So what are the functions that actually are important when we look at it for the transformation issue? Because that's what we are dealing with here, transformation. First of all, I would say that legal rules enshrine ethical, social, and political values into principles and into constitutional norms, thus mainstreaming all other norms. If you look at constitutions in your countries, the dogmatics are different everywhere, but basically what they do is that some principles that people agree upon are enshrined in there, and all the laws, the regular laws, so to speak, and every legislation has to comply with these basic principles. That's how you streamline, like human rights, basic rights, into the law court's decision all over the country. That's another way, for example, to have the principle of polluter pays to get kind of represented at all levels. Second, law provides instruments for societal, economic, and political choices, forcing citizens, companies, and state organizations to behave in a certain way. There's easy examples like that. Legislation prohibiting a certain polluting behavior. I mean, we've seen this, the state of planetary health. So we know for decades now that a lot has been done to actually improve pollution that can be seen. I remember in the 1970s even, the Rhine, you couldn't see the water because there was so much foam on the Rhine. And you would see actually people driving with their cars to the river and then washing their cars, right? That has been stopped. It wasn't done, by the way, by kind of taxing it. That's an idea that many economists have, right? We regulate with prices. And there is a rule, there's a certain room for kind of pricing. But in this case, you just prohibit it. You don't say, well, if you want to clean your car at the river, you have got to pay 20 euros. No, that's not the way of doing it. You go there and say it's prohibited. That's, by the way, an indirect function also of the law by the way of penalizing certain behavior. You actually change morals and attitudes of people, because everything that is actually penalized gets a bad image, basically. And no one would go. I've seen it when I went to Portugal in the 1990s still. People kind of going to their cars and removing the screw that keeps the oil inside. So the oil would just go into the kind of sewage system. That must be prohibited, right? So the law regulates people's and companies' behavior, prescribes certain standards. And thirdly, I would say, the law enables citizens to hold companies and governments responsible. Citizens all over the world, you've heard of environmental litigation, climate litigation, and I'm coming to this in a little bit more detail, where actually people have the right to sue and to stop companies from doing it. This is a very recent development, actually, and it's due to, in like 40 European countries, a convention called Aarhus Convention. Because it was, do we have someone from Denmark here? Because it was adopted in the city of Aarhus. And that's the habit, so if treaties are adopted, usually they get the name of the place where this has been done. Montreal Protocol, Kyoto Protocol, Bern Convention, and Basel Convention. So we've got the Aarhus Convention. Nobody knows about it. I mean, not even people who know international law know about it. But the Aarhus Convention actually was a revolution in most countries, and certainly in Germany, which has a good tradition of Prussian kind of administration, right? It's top down, it's command and control. There's little kind of, little participation. Usually when you try to get something from the German authorities, it's an act of mercy, right? They give it to you because they're in a good mood, but they could do a different behavior. So the Aarhus Convention actually prescribes information gathering. Every citizen in the EU and in 20 more member states of the Aarhus Convention can go to any company, to any government agency, and request information on environmental issues. And they have to provide it within a month. If they don't do it, you can go to court and force the company or the government agency to disclose that information, anything that is environment related. Almost no people know about it. That's an enormous development, because with that information then you can go and sue and have another material which you would need actually in order to stop it. Second, participation. In all countries, if there is a road to be built, a forest be felled, there has to be a public participation. So citizens can actually voice their concerns. And third, the right to go to court. And this is really amazing, because usually in former days, like for example, an organization like BUND, which is Friends of the Earth in Germany. So what they did is when there was a nuclear power plant, they would buy a patch of land close to this power plant, because then they were affected by this nuclear power plant or coal or whatever. And if you're affected, if your subjective rights are affected, meaning right to life, right to health, property, if that is affected, then you can go to court. That's the same all over the world. You can only go to court if your own rights are violated and infringed upon. But with this new Aarhus Convention, which is, as I said, valid in over 40 countries, citizens' organizations, not the citizens themselves, that was also discussed, by the way. Every citizen can go, should go and go to court and stop a company from polluting a river in the Bavarian Alps, let's say, although you live in Hamburg. But they can't do it. But NGOs can do it. So you can register as an NGO, and if you are fulfilling certain criteria, which are purely formal, not in content, then you get the right. So if you are registered in Hamburg, like Greenpeace is, for example, you can go and challenge a company which is discharging chemicals into a river in Bavaria. Amazing. And that has actually led to the recent rise in what we know as climate or environmental litigation. Before, I mean, usually it's the US that is where this takes place, and of the maybe 2,000 climate litigation cases which the Sabin Center actually lists, the large majority of those cases are in the US, but other regions in the world are kind of following this, and mostly in Europe. So what can you actually do? And that's where, I mean, one of the basic functions, as we said, is to prescribe a certain behavior. And if that is not followed by a company or by a government agency, people, through the NGOs, like BUND, Friends of the Earth, NABU in Germany, they can go to court, they can take it up. So citizens can hold companies and governments accountable. That's the basic idea. And like 10 years ago, I remember that many questioned, lawyers questioned actually, so why do we need that? That's from the US, right? And there, they don't have the precautionary principle. The US governments, all of them, hate the precautionary principle. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, there's not much legislation actually to control behavior of companies, for example. But what they have is a very, very sophisticated and advanced model of suing for damages. And that's what you all hear, right? That's in the newspapers. Someone went to Starbucks and got burnt, $1 million, right? $1 million in damages. And that's all over the place. Someone put the cat in the washing machine, millions in damages. So the American system actually works backwards. Once the damage has been done, so it doesn't prescribe a lot, but if there's damage, then you can get a really good sum of money. And that in turn keeps companies in kind of keeping their product safe, for example. So they work backwards. The European way is more like preemptive, right? You prescribe a certain behavior by companies, by government agencies, in order to make them not do certain things that harm other people. So people said, well, that's in the US. We in Europe, we don't need it because, for example, governments actually, they stick to the law. In Europe, governments stick to the law, which is a myth, actually. They don't, right? And that's actually a problem, I think. It's a problem for democracy, it's a problem for rule of law, because citizens usually think and they assume, and they are right to assume, that governments stick to the law, that they obey by the law. But if you look at, for example, the European Court of Justice, sits in Luxembourg, where the European Commission takes countries to court who are not kind of fulfilling what the EU law says, that's abundant. And especially in Germany, when you ask people, well, we are champions in environmental legislation. No. Germany is among those countries that are actually sued most in the European Court of Justice. Part of the problem is the federal structure, like Italy, like Belgium. So you've got kind of local governments that actually have to implement certain laws, and the federal government doesn't have influence enough. But part of it is also that, for example, the German government doesn't implement the water directive. It doesn't implement clean air directive, clean air policy. And in a host of other kind of areas, it's not implementing environmental law. That's why then NGOs can go and sue the governments and take them first to their own law courts. If that doesn't help, they go to the European Court. So, yes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So this is one way of using the law, actually, to kind of bring about change. There's another way of using the law to advance certain morals, certain standards. This is a little bit more risky if you do it, because if you've got a law that is written down, right, and then you've got a law court, you can prove this company is doing that, or this government, it's not complying with the law, then you can relatively well ascertain whether you will be successful or not. And in my previous incarnation, I used to work with Client Earth, which is a an international organization that does lawsuits all over the planet in order to sue governments to comply with the laws and companies. So bring about this change. You know that laws are kind of they mirror social and ethical values. That's what we've said before. But so they directly, the values actually influence the law. But it's also the other way around. The law has an effect, an impact on values. We just talked about fining people who actually clean their cars at the river, right? This has in turn led to a change in people's attitudes towards doing it. Suddenly it was considered to be inappropriate. Think of smoking in restaurants and bars. At the beginning, a lot of people would have said, even if they were non-smokers, that's going a bit far, right? It is a right of a person really to follow its bad habits, and it's not that bad. After it was instituted and people realized, I can actually smell the food that I'm eating, yeah, without this kind of interference by smoke, it's much better. And it's healthier in any case, so it has changed. So there is also the possibility to use the law to advance morals, standards. One example is, and we've heard it several times this morning, rights of nature. I'm an ardent fighter for rights of nature. And by the way, the opposite, ecocide, the introduction of ecocide as a crime. So if there's large, widespread, and long-term pollution, those people who are kind of responsible for it should be held liable for doing that in a criminal court. But rights of nature, usually people say, well, what's that? I mean, that's a very esoteric concept, isn't it? Well, there are some constitutions. We've had it in our group we discussed this morning, in Ecuador and Colombia. In Ecuador actually is in the constitution, Pachamama. So, and there every citizen can go to the court and claim that Pachamama has been infringed upon. So most people instinctively react at first, I don't know, I mean, that's a funny concept. And by the way, who should actually go to court? The river doesn't have a voice, right, and cannot go to court. Then you remind people that companies, for example, are nothing but a legal construct. They don't exist, really. I mean, they're only in paper, right? How do they act? By way of representatives, right? They have got the management. And the management, according to the constitution of this company, can actually represent the company in court, can conclude contracts and so on. So, if companies can do that, why not a river or an ecosystem, a forest, whatever? So you start thinking about it, and I think that's what's so great about it, that people start thinking out of the box. A year ago I was asked by a magazine, the Rotary Club. Many of you will know it. It's wealthy individuals who engage in philanthropic activities. I never had much to do with it, but I had written an article on how to implement rights of nature in Germany. So very concrete. So they must have seen that, because they asked, well, we are doing a special edition on biodiversity for our members. Why don't you write an article on rights of nature? And I thought, Rotary, what do I have to do with it? They'll never understand. But then I did it, because I thought, if 2 or 3 of the readers are actually starting to think, that's already worth it. And I got some good replies, actually, by readers. So the law can be used, actually, in a kind of reverse process to actually change conception. And for me, rights of nature is get away from this concept of this pyramid, which more or less obvious everyone seems to have. Like there's humans on top, and then come mammals, there's the apes, monkeys, and then come mammals, and then other vertebrates and invertebrates, and then the plants. So this pyramid of life, which is in our heads, and that suddenly then gets kind of disturbed. And for me, that is the ultimate kind of challenge, how to overcome this pyramid and realize that we are part of the web of life and of everything that's around us. So I'll stop here. Thank you. And I'm open for your questions.